Hi everyone. I hope you're really going to enjoy this very informal, light-hearted chat that I'm going to have with the wonderful Jessica Hepburn, who is inspirational. I'm sure she'll tell you about herself, but she's the only woman to have run the London Marathon, swum the English Channel, and summited, climbed is not the right verb, I believe, summited Everest, and inspirational. And in fact, she's so inspirational and so out of my comfort zone that after I spoke to her the other night, I spoke to one of my sons who asked me who I was speaking to on the phone, and I mentioned Jessica and her achievements. And there was a pause, and my son said to me, well, she can't possibly be one of your friends, Mum, because I'm the person who struggles to get to the top of the stairs.
Yeah, but I'm the person who struggles to get to the top of the stairs.
Well, that's what's great. So this is just going to be a very informal chat, which hopefully you'll enjoy.
And we're here at the Fertility Show, which is an annual event that happens at London's Olympia. And I invited you along here because we both are very involved in women's health.
Absolutely.
And me, particularly from a fertility perspective. Yeah, I mean, the reason why I ended up running the London Marathon, swimming the English Channel and climbing Mount Everest is because I went on a big fertility journey.
Yeah.
I went through a total of 11 rounds of IVF, and it was actually coming towards the end of that journey that we first met.
Yes.
Yeah. So we talked about whether we would dare confess how we met.
You're going to think that we were at an Alcoholics We weren't in a drug rehab or anything like that. It sounds awful.
In a way,
it feels a bit like that.
It feels a bit like that.
I know.
So we met.
Drum roll.
You're thinking, what is it going to be?
God.
We met at an anger management course.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And look at us now. You would never think that we'd done anything like that. No, of course not. No.
And I mean, I'll talk about like why I was there, and then maybe you can say, because basically I had come out of another unsuccessful round of IVF, and I remember I mean obviously I was devastated. It is devastating, and I remember sort of getting quite tetchy, angry with the clinician. Apologies to the clinicians amongst us.
Yeah.
But maybe you've experienced that with a patient who's just so struggling.
It's about loss of control as well, isn't it? Because we all get short-tempered and irritated and frustrated with things we can't control. And of course, none of us can control our fertility. And if you're doing your best and you're doing everything that the specialist is requiring of you and it still isn't successful, it is devastating. Well, beyond devastating.
Yeah, no, exactly. Yeah. And I apologise everyone for coughing, but I've got the lurgy at the moment. But it is absolutely about control. And I remember coming out of that appointment and my partner said to me, like, you need to do something about your anger. And so I went on this anger management course, and that's where we met. And there was just 3 of us in the room. Do you remember?
Yeah, I do. We were sitting next to one another, absolutely.
Yeah, there were only 3. I mean, so there was nowhere to hide, right? We haven't spoken about this, like, even though that was a long time ago and we've met several times, we haven't spoken about this. But I just remember it being so sort of intense, really, because there was 3 of us and the facilitator. And it wasn't really, really extraordinary. I mean, I like the thing that really stuck with me, and it'd be interesting to hear from your perspective, that I remember there was this moment in the session when the facilitator, Mike, said to me, actually, and it's really stayed with me, he sort of said, you're not angry, you're just sad, right? You're just sad. And sadness is a symptom of that anger. And I just, or anger, sorry, the other way around. Yeah. Anger is a symptom of the sadness. Yeah, sorry, the other way around. And he said, and I just like, that absolutely resonated. Yeah. And then he also said, you also need to go and do some work on your inner child. And so then that started a process of me going and doing some therapeutic work. And that therapeutic work and the anger management course didn't result in a baby, which is what I sort of hoped it would, In actual fact, I went through 11 rounds of unsuccessful IVF and didn't get pregnant. But then I went on to do these other things, extraordinary things, as we've talked about, and we may talk more about. But it was so transformational. So,
and
yeah.
you may not, we don't know, we never know, but you may not have achieved one of those things, let alone all three, had you achieved your other aim.
Yeah. I cannot imagine that I would have run the London Marathon, swum the Channel, and climbed Everest if I'd become a mother. And what I always say is that they don't replace the sadness of not being able to become a biological mother. You know, that is a sadness that I will always carry with me. But at the same time, I wouldn't change what my life is now for anything. You know, I sit with both those things all the time. So what about you? Why were you at the Anger Management course?
Probably a very similar situation to you. Not that I hadn't had failed IVF, but I was at a position in my life where I think things had to change. And I knew something wasn't right. Many things weren't right. But you often don't necessarily, you haven't necessarily got a diagnosis on tap. And I had read Mike's book before I went to the course, and a lot of what he said really resonated with me, and I knew several other people who'd been on the course and had, you know, rated it really highly. And it was one of those things I had booked and cancelled. You may have done that as well, because it was a 3-day, I mean, it was a long weekend, wasn't it? It was a big commitment, and it was hard going, and I was kind of trepidatious about doing it. But I just knew in myself, in my heart of heart, that I had to do something. It's not offered to you on a plate. It wasn't a drug or a medication that would fix it. I didn't think I needed counselling. And it was great. I mean, we didn't always agree with Mike. He's quite a tough, he was very controversial, but that's great. Yeah. And I can remember three of us plus Mike being in the room, and there were quite a lot of arguments in the room. It was a bit of anger in that room. But you know, I think it was very helpful. But what I thought and what I felt after was that it wasn't an instantaneous result. You didn't go home and suddenly you were rejuvenated as Anne Mark II or Jessica Mark II. But I think a lot of the things that we learned and some of the nuggets that he threw in resonated, and as you said, you find the inner child. This is sadness, not anger. I think that was a drip effect.
It's really stayed with me. Yeah.
And I think I said to you when we spoke this week, I was clearing out my study this week and getting rid of books and things that I was going to give to charity, and I came across the workshop books that we did and all my little notes, and I had notes all the way around the margins and everything, and little post-it stickers, so I'll keep that for posterity. But it was great, and I think it's all things like that. I think they're part of life's rich tapestry, you know, and people can judge. You know, if you say to somebody, well, I went on an anger management course, they might go, whoa, what, you know, did you get arrested? You know,
yes,
but
exactly.
I know. It's very
judgy. You have road rage or something.
But I think the point is that there are many people who need to manage their, not necessarily anger, but the way they moderate that aspect of the character. And I think if you can take that into your own hands and say, right, I'm going to get help, that's great.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. And actually talking about books, of course, as well as doing these adventures, I've written 2 books, and I've got a 3rd book about to come out. And
that's one-upmanship. I've only got one.
You'll catch me.
That nearly killed me.
You're running a massive clinic.
Oh, God.
All I do these days is write books and go on little adventures or big adventures. Yeah. But my first book, The Pursuit of Motherhood, which was about my journey through fertility treatment, it included a chapter about
I remember that, yes. So it was already out in the open. So you're
in my first book, Anne, so we always will be connected.
Yes, it's there, but I can't deny. I didn't meet her, I don't know anything about it. No. I know. So it's funny, and I wish Mike Fisher was here today. Actually, in fact, we must include him because he's still going strong.
Yeah.
And you know, I'm sure he's still. I
wonder if he'd remember us.
I think he would. I think he he's
We're
got a
so
very good
memorable.
memory.
Yeah.
Absolutely, he will know. I mean, you know, if one of his attendees goes on to do wonderful things like you have, he'll know. Yeah,
Oh.
yeah. So no, it was great. And you know, as you said, it's difficult to, you know, I'm sure that was a hugely instrumental course, but I was at a stage in my life where things took a different path, and as you've just said, the way where I am now, you know, had that different path not taken place, I wouldn't be sitting here. I wouldn't have come from Postcards from Midlife, where I've been presenting at an event, and I wouldn't be running a business and, you know, doing all the things I'm doing now. So,
Yeah, so
you have to take strength
happened.
in that.
So that's all happened since we met. So
yes,
because you were working in the NHS
that's right.
as a consultant.
Yes, that's right.
And so yeah, what's the sort of potted?
Well,
we haven't seen each other for a few years.
No, we met, I think, a few years ago. Before you summited, you were training.
Yeah.
That's right. You were doing your training. I think you were doing Snowdonia and the Cairngorms. I remember you saying that every weekend you were heading off to train. And I thought, that's interesting. Every weekend I'm sitting on the couch. Not quite. But you know, hats off to anybody working in the NHS these days, because it's tough. It's tough, and it's tougher now than it was when I left. And you know, there's only so many parts of your life that you can divide up and still achieve. You know, if you've got you know, kids to raise and a job to do and patients to treat, and you still have to have a life yourself, it's tough. And in the end, something's got to give. And I knew there were parts of my working life which I loved, and I felt I was delivering a really great service because I was in control of it. And that, unfortunately, was the private side. Within the NHS, doctors can, you know, they can excel, but they are limited to a considerable extent by the funding, by regulations, by the management support, by government support. And I always felt there was a ceiling to the level of service, particularly in menopause, which is my passion, that we could provide. And it wasn't a knee-jerk moment. I didn't suddenly leave and jump ship. It was a very gradual process. One thing led to another. I gradually withdrew from the NHS, then I left completely. And it took a long time to set up my own clinic. I mean, as any doctor knows who's set up a clinic and staffs it and runs it, it's a massive learning curve, probably not dissimilar from you and your mountaineering.
Yeah.
I mean, doctors are not business people. We don't learn anything to do with man management or business when we're training. And suddenly you have to be a clinician. You have to keep that going because that's what runs the business. You have to be a recruiter. You have to be a business person. You have to know about HR, about
marketing,
goodness knows all what.
And doing videos for your
exactly,
website.
You know,
Don't have that on the NHS.
You know, it's just, and then suddenly you think, actually, I can't do any of that crap, or not very well. So then you think, well, then I need somebody to do this and somebody to do that, and before you know it, you know, what you thought would be a neat little clinic with a few doctors seeing menopausal women suddenly becomes this marathon, mammoth task. And you have to have a good team behind you, but getting that team together is a learning curve. I mean, as you know, you've worked with people all your life. You can't, to get a team, there's often trial and error. It's stressful. And, you know, it's, I think my next book will be how not to set up a clinic, you know, because we did a lot of our refurbishment and so on during lockdown. And that was a journey in itself. Everybody was going down with COVID or self-isolating. You know, it literally was worthy of a Channel 4 documentary about how not to, you know. So, but you learn.
You learn so much.
You learn.
It's the sort of thing you only do once generally.
Yes,
so
absolutely.
You can't necessarily put what you learn into practice.
Absolutely.
But tell me, I always remember when we last met, we had dinner together, and I was sort of in my, I think I must have been in my mid-40s. So I was sort of like looking at menopause in the distance, and I remember you advocating for HRT,
Yeah.
and I remember sort of listening and thinking, you know, like whether it was something that I would consider. And of course, you work very closely with Laura Biggs, who runs the
Yep.
Fertility Show and is also very involved
Menopause mandate.
in the menopause mandate.
Amazing.
Absolutely.
Yes. Yes.
And she's also a big advocate for HRT.
Yep.
And but I'd be really interested in how you would counsel me at this stage, because I've always been, and I remain a bit like, well, I went on this big gynecological journey, which was my fertility journey, and like I am a bit like taught to the hand about anything else. And what would your sort of advice be to me about that? So I'm 52 now.
Well, I mean, can I just give a big shout out to the Menopause Mandate, because I got introduced to them through you, and I've done my best to go up to every single one of their events. They had a big gathering about 3 weeks ago at the Houses of Parliament, which was their 1-year birthday anniversary. It was an amazing event, and what's great now is it's not just a PR campaign. There were an amazing group of women there actually presenting evidence. You know, this is what we're doing. We've got the videos up with Holland and Barrett. You know, these are the workplace directions we're going in. This is the support we're offering to women. So there's actually tangible change coming out of the campaign in as little as a year. And, you know, I know they've got glamorous, you know, they've got Davina McCall, Mariella Frostrup, Penny Lancaster, Lisa Snowdon. I mean, it was probably the most glamorous lineup you get, and they're all menopausal. But actually, it's not about the surface and the veneer. It's about you scratch below the surface, and they're doing an amazing amount of work, which I just love.
Yeah.
You know, there is substance there. And it's concrete. They're worried about the HRT shortages. They're worried about women not getting objective, scientifically based information. God, we all are, but they're actually doing something about it. And I think the group they've got together is brilliant. And I hear they've got Jo Wiley's coming on board, I believe. She'll be a great ambassador. And I believe Naomi Watts in the States, who will be a great, so they're really branching out. And these are great women. I mean, these are women that, even if you're not a sort of a movie groupie and you don't particularly like music, Jo Wiley is a bit of an inspirational icon for women in that age group, and many others. So I think the group they've selected is just brilliant. So it's a pleasure to support them and work with them.
Yeah, no, it definitely feels like it's a moment for women's voices.
It's just great. And, you know, HRT, as I was just saying last night when I was speaking at the midlife event, it's chalk and cheese. I mean, I've been doing menopause for 30 years in one form or another, so there's nothing I haven't seen. I've seen the dramas of the breast cancer crisis, I've seen the shortages, I've seen the lack of training, everything. But the really good news is that the HRT we've got today in 2023 I think it's as good as it will get. It's supremely safe from the point of view of breast cancer, other conditions, thrombosis, high blood pressure, side effects. We're talking about plant-based HRT that's derived from soya and yam, which makes most women happy. Most women don't want synthetic hormones. And there are numerous ways you can take them, gels, sprays, patches, so you don't feel like you're popping pills all the time. And the results are, you know, fantastic. They're beyond most women's expectations. So I would say that for anybody who's, you know, trepidatious or uncertain, try it. If it doesn't work, you can walk away, and if it does, you carry on.
But I suppose my question would be, like, how do I know whether it's something that is worth trying, or I need to try? I mean, like, I guess because I've done so much work, because I went through such a difficult time in my life with the IVF, and then I sort of, what transformed everything for me was writing. I discovered a passion. It's become my work. Then going on adventures, which involved a lot of physical activity. When you were saying
Great
that
for your bones and your cardiovascular system. Yeah.
Yeah, no,
yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah.
And also, you know, my mental
health as well.
I mean, I do think that physical exercise and adventures are like,
Yes.
like even more for your
serotonin, brilliant for
your mental health
serotonin
and so like how, and I feel most of the time pretty good. So the question is there, you know, is there room for improvement, or is pretty good enough?
Well, it's an interesting one. I suspect if you, and not just you, but virtually every 52-year-old woman sat down and did a standard menopause symptom tracker, which is pretty intensive. There's 37 points of reference. You complete it, and it's a tick box exercise. It's not detailed. It's yes, no, maybe.
Yeah.
I think most women would be astonished at the number of boxes that they ticked yes, and I see that every day. So women might come along with maybe menstrual headaches, aches and pains, maybe a bit of brain fog. Brain fog's a big issue. Loss of fluency of speech, short-term memory, just not being quite as sharp as you were 10 years ago. That's a big issue. But when they start to fill, so they come along with 3 or 4 symptoms, that's fine. But when they fill the chart in, it's usually 70% plus that they've completed. And they go down the list and think, oh my God, I didn't know that was possibly a menopausal symptom. So you end up going from somebody who thinks might have a few problems, and suddenly everything falls into place.
And is that
very common?
Is that tick thing on your website? I mean, would I be able to? How would I access
I can send you one. We don't have it on the website because we would
be
exactly. People are going, oh my God, you know. But everybody, I mean, I would say it's mandatory to know what you're dealing with before you see someone. So when I see someone in clinic, I have got a pretty good idea where we're heading. And menopause generally divides into 3 categories. You've got physical symptoms, emotional, which is fairly self-explanatory, and cognitive, and these are the 3 categories. You might have somebody who predominates in one category.
Right.
I think of it like a Venn diagram, but unfortunately you do get some women who draw the short straw and they're in the centre and they have all 3, and their lives are in meltdown. But even somebody who has, you know, one cluster of symptoms, they could be very severe. I mean, you could have crippling anxiety, you might have sleep deprivation, which causes chronic fatigue and cognitive problems. So everything kind of rolls into one. And, you know, these sound, you know, the way we're talking, they sound fairly trivial, but actually they can be very severe. And if you're running a busy life like you, if you're trying to write, you've got to have complete focus. You know, you can't possibly write if your brain's all over the place, or you're tired, or you're not on point. And so things like that.
Do the symptoms carry on forever, or do they stop after? I mean, is the idea, like, again, you can see that you're talking to someone who hasn't really gone down this route. But I am interested. Oh God, I know you, and between you and Laura,
you must be thinking, oh God, you're going to end up on HRT.
No, I am. But like, is it something you take? Is it something that you take forever, or
personal choice? So there are, as with all medicine, you can fine-tune it. So you could take it short-term, but the trend very much nowadays is long-term, and there are really key reasons for that. So we know that women who take HRT for a decade, so approximately 50 to 60, give or take, so menopause to 60, they have up to a 50% reduction in the risk of dying from heart attacks and strokes. It's massive. I mean, even if you gave up smoking, didn't drink, lost weight and exercised, you're not going to cut your cardiovascular death rate by 50%. Wow. Mortality rates overall, because of the reduction in cardiovascular deaths, osteoporosis deaths, bowel cancers down by 40% in long-term users. So if you look at the big health groups like that, women on long-term HRT, their mortality, if you compare them with peer groups, same age but not on HRT, the mortality rates are down by 40%. The figures are astonishing, and you know what's equally astonishing is the fact that that's not out there in the public domain. You know,
or it's not freely available on
GPs often don't know. No, so we're not just talking about you know, sleeping better. For now, that will help, but we're talking about living longer and also living better, being more healthy.
Yeah. Well, I am persuaded
So-
that I want to do the tick box thing.
Yes.
And see how
Where
many
you
I
are.
tick. Yes, yes.
Yes.
I think
you
everyone should do that.
No, I do. And, you know, and the beauty is it's not a long-term commitment. If I meet somebody who's wavering, of course they can explore herbal therapy, complementary therapy. We've got that in my book, Natural Menopause. For some women, that's fantastic. For some women, they need a bit more. Some women are interested. But if you try HRT and after 4 or 6 months you think it's not for you, you can just walk away.
Yeah.
There's no long-term commitment. You're not going to crash if you stop it.
Yeah.
So,
Thank
yeah.
you.
So
See, we
there
didn't
you
even know that we were
you've
going to
had
have
you had a free consultation.
Yes, I know. Exactly.
No,
you didn't know that we were
no,
going to have this conversation.
no,
It looked like it was set up,
Yes,
but actually
no, it
was
does
brilliant.
actually. But you know, I mean, you've probably got the bones of an ox with all the training you did. Honestly, I mean, you know, and swimming's great for cardio and everything. So you're probably supremely fit.
Yeah, but I'm really struggling with the weight thing. What's your view?
HRT. So yeah, it's always good. So weight goes on because your testosterone and estrogen levels are gradually declining from about 45 onwards. And effectively what happens is you lose muscle mass. Now, you may not have lost as much as most people because of your background, but you've probably, I mean, you're not training for Everest now, so you probably have lost a bit of muscle mass. And that's absolutely critical because it's muscle activity that drives your basal metabolic rate, and that's what determines your weight stability. So the minute your BMR drops, even though you eat the same, you do the same every day, you don't change anything, nature's against you, you're going to put weight on. And HRT resets that by introducing estrogen and possibly a bit of testosterone and a bit of strength training, and your muscle mass comes back. You know, I've had patients who lose a stone to in a year and a half, and they're not actually doing very much. They're just starting HRT and eating sensibly.
Well, that is something that is very attractive.
That's called middle-aged spread.
Yes.
It's
just
biology.
It's like nothing's changing, but it's just not shifting.
Yes, and that's because your hormones are fighting against you, and you get to a point where you can't, you can't, even if you try, you can't lose the weight because there's a limit to how low you can drop calories, because then you can't function. Exactly. And if you're so tired, you can't exercise. So you just end up in this vicious cycle. And some women will give up. It happens to men as well to some extent, but HRT can definitely help stabilize that and reverse it.
Wow.
Definitely. Yeah.
Well, thank you.
So you're convinced?
Yeah, I'm on my way to being convinced, that's for sure. Any other questions that we want to cover?
Well, tell us about your future projects. You've got a book in the the gestation, so to speak.
Yeah, I've got my third book coming out next year. It's going to be sort of formally announced and go on pre-sale in July.
Wonderful.
But it will come out in March, and it's totally standalone, but it's also the sort of third in a trilogy of books, which I'm the sort of central narrator, and it's about sort of my adventures in life. The adventure through IVF was the first book, The Pursuit of Motherhood, and then Swimming the Channel, and trying to work out whether motherhood makes you happy. And then the third book's really a conclusion of being saved from the waves of life and summiting the biggest mountain in the world. And my first two books have recently been optioned for film.
Wow.
And so...
do we hear Reese Witherspoon in the background there?
Well, who knows? I mean, film and the book industry, as you know, works very, very slowly. But it is exciting.
It's very much on the Eat, Pray, Love.
Yeah,
well, I mean, I don't mean to trivialize, but you know, there's very
definitely.
Similar. Elizabeth Gilbert.
I mean, Elizabeth Gilbert is my absolute idol.
Is she?
You know,
yes.
like the British version of Elizabeth Gilbert would be my dream. And I'm working on some other projects, and I sort of always say that, I didn't become a mother, but I have caring responsibilities. But
you've given birth to 3 books?
Yes, I've given birth to 3 books, and also I'm doing a lot of talks in schools, sort of about my life, as you know, that I started my life in theatre. Most of my
Yes.
professional career has been in theatre, and then I started
The
writing
Lyric.
and doing these adventures.
Yes.
Yeah, not far from here, around the Lyric Hammersmith for 10 years. And then just sort of, and then shoehorning some great fertility messages into that for young women, because I still think that young women and, well, young people generally, all they get taught is how not to get pregnant. And we need a more sort of rounded approach to fertility education. So yes, I'm doing a lot of that. I've really enjoyed our conversation.
Do you know what? I think you've got so much on your plate. You're definitely going to need some HRT to get you through it.
Well, I'm definitely doing the tick
Especially
box.
if you get involved in the filming. That sounds amazing.
Oh.
Would you try and retain some ownership of the script and so on? Because I know some authors, you end up handing your work over, and God knows what happens in the end.
Well, I've handed my work over. The woman that's adapting it is a brilliant young writer, well, younger than me writer. She's watch the space, because she's sort of on the verge of becoming really a big thing. But I'm not expecting her to be totally rigid to the story.
Right.
And I think she's far rawer and sexier than me. But I think I'm sort of the opinion that it's much better just to give your work over and let them do what they do and make it what they want it to be, rather than to try and be all over it, because I don't think...
Because it might become too much about you rather than your story and the message you want to get across. And that's the message, isn't it, that's important, empowering other women to... to look at the mistakes that you've made. I mean, we all make mistakes, don't we? Goodness knows, every day, and learn from them. And maybe someone else can be more dispassionate than...
and also just using the work to inspire other, people to tell stories from my what is essentially my life story.
Sounds fantastic.
Is exciting to me. So
Whoa.
I'm not expecting a faithful adaptation, but I am really excited to see what they do with it.
Are we talking big screen or small screen or both, or do you know?
It's a film as opposed to serialization, so big screen. But of course, everything goes big screen,
and then it ends up on
very quickly
Netflix and Sky, and there are other channels available, just in case we get criticised for that. No, that sounds amazing. Goodness, exciting.
Yeah.
So you could see yourself being played on the screen. That must be uncanny, actually, to have somebody play you.
Yeah, but
wow.
and hopefully they'll be far more attractive than me.
Oh. You've got to get the essence across.
We're not. We're
you
not
better
there
get your
yet,
shortlist ready. Wonderful.
I'm getting my red carpet dress ready.
Oh, fabulous. Oh, fantastic. Gosh, well, there you go. Who would have thought that, when was it, 12 years ago? 2010, I think it was. Yeah, it was 2010, I think, that we would have met, and our paths have gone. And I think, going back to the beginning of the conversation, if I had said to you, and you'd said to me, where will you be in 12 years or 10 years? I don't think either of us would have, well, I just know we would never have ever said, I would have done this, this and this. And, it's funny, life takes you on completely unexpected paths, doesn't it?
Right.
And you just have to go with the flow.
I was going to say, sorry, that I'd never have thought that I wouldn't be a mother. Or that if I wasn't a mother, that I would be okay with that ending. And that, and both those things are true, that I'm not a mother, but I'm okay with the ending.
And that, I think, is all right. It's all right. As Elizabeth Day would say, how to fail.
Yeah, absolutely.
How to fail, but learn from it.
Yeah.
Perfect.